welcome once again to my channel. I am Anna from Clouds Up to Anna and at Study Hard Anna, and this is my quarantine TBR. As you guys may or may not know, I started a readathon, a TBR, at the beginning of quarantine with books that I had in this room. Well, not this room, but you get the idea. I started my quarantine readathon with videos that I would leave in the cards. I wasn't able to edit the third vlog in the series, but I did film it. I just want to get that out there. But I also want to share my progress with you as well as my opinions on the books that I have read. I did have a lot of time to read, but I didn't as much as I would have wanted to, mainly because I wasn't vlogging. I am trying my best though. Regarding my TBR list, there are I think over 30 books on there, and I've made some changes to the list, so there's a lot to go through today. I'm going to start off with the books I have yet to read along with their respective prompts, and later I am going to be listing all the books that I have already read and finished. I'll have a scan of my spread so far in a drive link in the description below in case you want to use it. I hope you enjoy the video. The first prompt was to read something that was over 500 pages long, and for this I have chosen the entire Arabian Nights. They are lighter than they look. I asked for these when I turned 16, and I was actually too intimidated to start, but I've read bits and pieces since I started the readathon, and I have to say I'm really intrigued by the stories. It kind of feels like Inception. So far so good. The next prompt is to read a book that was turned into a movie or a show, and for this I've chosen to read Me Before You because, you know, it is one of those books that you buy in sets because it was just such a deal. It came in a 3-book set along with its sequel and another book. The adaptation is pretty famous. It's got Emilia Clarke and Sam Claflin in it. I did read the first 3 pages, I think, but I was too preoccupied with schoolwork at the time that I couldn't bring myself to actually continue. I am actually kind of excited to pick it up again. The next one would be a book with a number in the title, so I looked through my shelves and I found my Charles Dickens collection. Hooray! A Tale of Two Cities has got a number in the title. It will be the first of Dickens that I will ever read. Well, I've read a little bit of Great Expectations, but that was a long time ago and I don't actually remember, so I am pretty excited. Okay, next prompt says to read a book written by a female author. This was not something I had to look very hard for, but it was kind of difficult to choose, so ultimately I went for Querido Primer Novio by Zoe Valdez. So it is a book written by a Latina, I'm pretty sure. This book is about a girl who travels back to Cuba. She's an adult, so she travels back to Cuba and she reminisces about the time when she was 17 and living there in the 70s. I exchanged this at a market where I was working with my business. I exchanged for this one along with a John Green book for my All the Boys I've Loved Before trilogy. And I know there's a lot of people who actually love that trilogy, but I don't know, I only liked the first book and the second one was a bit of a chore to go through, so I just didn't think it was worth it, so I sold them. Well, actually exchanged them. My dog just joined us for a little bit of some reading. I can't pick him up because if I try to pick him up he's going to jump at me because he's kind of aggressive, so let's just leave him be. The next prompt asks you to read a collection of works, and for this I had chosen this very beautiful Wordsworth collection of Oscar Wilde stories, plays, and poems. I got this many years ago in Mexico City along with the Hans Christian Andersen edition, but I ultimately changed my mind when I bought this edition of Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems. I am reading it little by little, getting used to his poetry, to the detective stories that seem to be Sherlock Holmes ripoffs. His poetry is so amazing. I wanted to have this experience I had in junior high where my teacher paused at every element to discuss it, and I didn't get to have this experience in high school, so I've been trying to do that by myself and I've really been enjoying this learning experience. Next one is to read a work of nonfiction, and girl, I have lots of them from my parents. They loved reading and they had this big ass container where they stored all of the books that they kept, and they were mostly political nonfiction and things along those lines. I carried everything I could. Among them is this little book called Los 10 Mandamientos en el siglo XXI by Fernando Sabater. It is basically a philosophical essay by this Latin American philosopher, agnostic by the way. He questions how effectively these 10 Catholic or Christian rules can shape our society today and how ethical they still are. Alright, next up is a book by a famous author, and I could have chosen to read a classic here, but I chose to read An Abundance of Catherines by John Green. This is a John Green book that I got at the market. I have a collection of Green books because although they aren't my favorites, there was something about Green's storytelling that made me want more when I was younger. I am older now and I don't particularly desire reading any of his works except for maybe Will Grayson, so An Abundance of Catherines will make or break my current opinion on John Green. Next up is a book written by my favorite author. I was about to go for a book by Mary Lou, maybe the last one in the Legend series or another recent one she's written. But I wanted to go back to my childhood for this one and chose to read The Kill Order by James Dashner. The Maze Runner series were the first books that I've ever read that weren't middle school, so they hold a very special place in my heart. I remember running down the halls with the book in hand, and it was pretty good memories. The Kill Order was the first of this series that I had ever read, and it was by chance because the book fair at the elementary school that I was in didn't specify the chronology of the books. I remember reading this in class in 5th grade instead of watching Hachiko with the rest of the class, because the time that I had watched Hachiko before that, I had cried like uncontrollably. So I don't want to embarrass myself in front of my classmates, and I decided to read instead. Next one is a book at the bottom of my reading list, and this was an easy one. Mr. Murder by Dean Koontz, which is a thriller about a famous author with a family and a serial killer who look exactly the same. This book I bought when I went on a trip to London like 3 years ago, and I bought it because if I didn't buy a book there, I wasn't there. It was that simple. Besides, the book was like £2. There was more reason to purchase. I did start reading it, and I am a little bit into it, but I'm just not vibing with it right now. I really like the plot, and I really like the writing, and I really like the characters. I'm just not really feeling it at the moment, so I know that I will pick it up eventually. This next prompt I added because I have a ton of books that my parents like, and wanting to read as much as possible, I chose to read Conversaciones Privadas by Jesus Blanco Cornelas, which is a book my mom really liked and one she reread constantly. When I grabbed the book, it still had like a receipt as a bookmark in the middle. This is a book about journalism and how this is a very dangerous profession to pursue here in Mexico. Let's give it a try. It doesn't really hurt. Is to read a book that is 100 years or older, and for this I decided to read The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. This book I painted the edges of with acrylic paint, and this book has a very funny story behind it. When I was still in school, like a month before the pandemic forced us into quarantine, I took this book from my school's library. I had personal beef with the school, and the library had like 4 copies of the same exact book. So for me, it was like the perfect heist I could have ever pulled off. It was kind of tricky because the book had barcode stickers, so the censors at the end of the halls would bust me if I wasn't careful enough. But I was ingenious, and that's how this baby came to my possession. It is actually one of my most prized possessions in the entire world. Next one is a childhood read, and for this I decided to pull out my Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend by Matthew Dix. This book I read when I was in my last year of elementary school, and it is such a beautiful story. It is a story about this imaginary friend whose child has Asperger's, and so this is the way he copes with reality, and he is one of the only imaginary friends still around for this kid's age. And so he has to save his kid, Max, from an enormous threat, and being an imaginary friend, his options are super limited, and it's super interesting and it's super beautiful, and I really recommend it to pretty much everybody because it's my favorite book. Next up is a book with magic or magical elements in it, so of course I chose to read the entire Chronicles of Narnia. What, you thought I'd say Harry Potter? We don't support homophobes or transphobes in this house. We are the homo, okay? Besides, I already read the HP series, and it was kind of tedious to go through the first 5 books, so I wouldn't say it's a series that I avidly recommend, but if you are going to be reading anything from J.K. Rowling, please support piracy. But anyway, this copy of the Chronicles of Narnia is illustrated, and it is one of my most prized possessions because it is one of the first books that I bought with my own money. Now that I think about it, most of my prized possessions are books. Anyway, I read the prequel first because this anthology is in chronological order. Get it? Chronicles of Narnia are in chronological order. Drawings are fantastic. It gives me this kind of storyteller for kids vibe. I don't know, I just know that I really like the experience of reading the first book. Okay, a graphic novel. This is hard because at the time that I made this list, I owned 1 graphic novel, which is Username Evie by YouTuber Joe Sugg. It's a book about a girl whose father was a computer whiz or programmer, and so he creates this virtual world for her to live in, or rather to use, I think. I don't really remember, I'm not really familiar. So, along with this one, I am going to read Mouse by Art Spiegelman, which is an anthology of the Holocaust with mice, and a biography of Spiegelman's father, who was a Polish Jew in the time of the Holocaust. The Pulitzer Prize sticker wasn't what caught my attention, but rather the really cute bookstore worker. She was super passionate about this book, and that's what really sold it for me. She made me realize that I really want to work in a bookstore because she was so passionate about it, and she had read most of the graphic novels in the section. Dream job. Next book to read is a play, and for this one I wanted to read Les Miserables, but I don't find the copy that I wanted to read anywhere in this house, so I ultimately switched to Vera by Oscar Wilde. Of course, I had to read something from my Oscar Wilde collection, so I just flipped through the plays and picked one at random, so let's see where this takes us. A book that I started but haven't finished. This was a difficult one to choose because there are quite a few books that I am guilty of doing this too, but we are choosing another one of my most prized possessions, which is Astronauts by Stanislaw Lem. It's so beautiful. It's got really cute cover art, and it's a soft cover, but it also has a dust jacket on it, and oh my god. I started this when I was a lot younger, and I couldn't find the determination to go past chapter 1, but I do remember being very interested in the plot, and I still am every time I look at the summary. It probably just wasn't my time to read it, and there are quite a few books where this happens for me, so I am very excited to get into this one. Besides, I heard that Stanislaw Lem was one of the fathers of science fiction. A book with the name and the title. I was about to pick Sherlock Holmes for this, but I had already read half the stories in it, so I then decided to go by The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. It is this beautiful sterling edition. I am trying to collect classics of it. A book or books recommended by somebody else. I have two options on this, and I've already finished one of them, so I will only talk about the one I have yet to read, which is The Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. My best friend recommended this to me after he sat through my entire hunt for books to fit this prompt at the beginning of quarantine. He said that since I've already read The Hollow, this one might be just as interesting or even more, so I'm quite excited to get into this one. Okay, a historical novel. It could be either non-fiction or fiction. For this, I've chosen an author that my parents really like, Francisco Martín Moderno. He is a historian, and he has written a couple of books in his series called 100 Myths of the History of Mexico. I am going to be reading part 1. Our history, just as USA history, is extremely glorified, and it is told like a story with heroes and villains so that we feel nationalism and patriotism. Francisco Martín Moreno grabs 100 of these myths of the history of Mexico and retells them just as they happened with evidence supporting him. These kinds of books are really exciting for me to read, so I am really excited to get into it as well. A bestseller. I have quite a few of those in here, of course. I had this one laying around, and after a quick Google search, I found that 1+1 by Jojo Moyes is actually a bestseller. I don't really know what it is about. I just know that it came in this package along with Me Before You and the sequel. But anyway, reading is reading. Next up is a poetry book, and I've chosen to read some Pablo Neruda. He is a very iconic Latin American poet. One of my best friends really likes him, as well as my parents, and they had this copy of 20 love poems and a song of despair laying around, so that's what I'm gonna read. I've already read some, and I've made some notes. Last one of unread books in this list is a personal choice, and it's going to be a reread for me. I decided to read one of my all-time favorite books, All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. Don't remember how you pronounce it. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering your name. This is a book about a girl whose sister died a year ago, and about a boy whose family situation and mental health aren't the best. They meet by chance one day, and then they are assigned a group project together, so they hang out a lot more. I very recently read Holding Up the Universe by the same author, and I didn't remember her being this good. I really like the fact that her stories are so diverse and that she touches the subject of mental health so well. This book could have made me cry, but at the time I had read it, I didn't have any feelings whatsoever, so I know that I'm going to go through quite the journey when rereading this book. I have an excuse for not having had read as much as I would have wanted to, and it is the fault of some of the books listed under my progress. I mean, it is partly my fault because I didn't stop reading these books when I started to load them, but I really wanted to write a rant review on them, so reading the entire series was fundamental to me. But anyway, the first book I picked up for the readathon was Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I documented this process in the first 2 readathon blogs, and this book is actually the thumbnail for both of them, so if you want to go check them out, they're in the cards over here or over there, I'm not sure. I was fulfilling the prompt of reading a classic. I have to say that I really loved this book. It was written beautifully, and the way that the concept was executed was very well done. For the ones who don't know what Lolita is about, it is about Humbert, a 40-something-year-old adult who becomes obsessed with this 12-year-old girl who looks almost exactly as his first love when he was that age. Something that you you have to understand about this book is that it is not a love story. Do not read it as a love story, even if it is marketed that way, because my edition of this book was marketed as a love story. Do not read it as a love story. This is a book about pedophilia, about a child predator who kidnaps and repeatedly rapes his stepdaughter. This is somebody who tries to convince himself that this child loves him. This is about a little girl who suffers all the way, almost up to the end. So be critical and objective when reading Lolita. Nabokov himself stressed that Dolores Hayes was a victim in all of this. If you haven't read the book, or if you have already read it and your interpretation of it is anywhere near love, please do reconsider. Next book I decided to read and finish is Los Presidentes by Germán Dehesa. This prompt was to read a book that you could finish in a day, and I failed miserably. But it was a great book. Germán Dehesa was a Mexican columnist, and this book is a collection of all of his newspaper columns from 1994 to 2006, I think. This is my mom's all-time favorite writer, and I could definitely see why. It was a lot of fun to read this book because the way that he writes immerses you. It's as if you were talking to your cool uncle who expresses his totally liberal political views and who complains about the government and about the people. There were a lot of things that I found really funny and others that I found really insightful, like the way he interprets being a citizen should be. Besides, he also talks about our current president when he used to be state governor. Honestly, I don't get why people still voted for him now if he is still the way that he was when Germán Dehesa wrote about him. But I'm sure that if he were still alive, Dehesa would definitely write a lot about our president, but he would take it with the same dark humor that makes him so likable. Next book I finished was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, and it was because my ex-boyfriend recommended it to me. Well, he didn't recommend it to me, but it is his favorite book and I wanted to surprise him by reading it, and I did not regret it. You've probably seen the movie, but please read the book. It is so much better. It is so funny, and it takes you on an emotional roller coaster, and it nerds out on you, and oh my god, it's really so good. For those who don't know what Ready Player One is about, it is a sort of dystopia in the year 2045 where people have resorted to escaping reality by playing a VR game called the Oasis. Literally everybody. The creator of this game dies, and he unleashes an Easter egg hunt because he wants to do a Willy Wonka kind of thing in which the person who finds the egg will inherit his entire fortune as well as the Oasis. So we have Wade, our teenage protagonist, who is a super fan and who is very determined to find the egg, and he also has to deal with so much shit along the way. It is a sci-fi-ish kind of book, and I really recommend it to anybody who is into video games or into pop culture. I remember my ex-boyfriend and I, after I finished reading this book, we sat in a video call and we were watching the movie at the same time and criticizing it because the book was not like this and like that, and this could have worked a lot better, and it was just so fun. Okay, so now we have the series that threw my life down the drain. That was a prompt. A series, not a book that would throw my sanity down the drain. I chose The Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. Shit. I decided on this because I had already read the first book and I already had all of the remaining songs of the series. Besides, the covers were angelic and I thought that the book itself would be too, but boy, was I fucking wrong. I have an entire rant review written for this, which I will post somewhere in the future if you guys are interested. But this book is basically a fantasy dystopia fantasy series where silver-blooded people are royalty and they have powers, and red-blooded people are slaves because they are normal. So our main character, Mayor Barrow, discovers that she has the silver powers despite having red blood. So the government has to hide her and pretends that she's a lost silver princess to cover this up. Then the next of the book turns into the Hunger Games, I guess, because we focus on overthrowing the government and rebellion and some boring shit where our main character is always the symbol. I do have several problems with this series. Third book literally gave me a headache that lasted an entire week. So yeah, there are worse things in the world than this series, I guess, but after like a month of not reading, I picked up Everything by Nicola Yoon because I was feeling for a light read and because I was also filling up the prompt for a romance novel. This book is about a girl who is allergic to a shit ton of things. She lives in her bubble house along with her mother and her nurse and never leaves because she doesn't know what could trigger another episode and potentially kill her. Somebody moves next door to her. I'm a cute angsty boy. And it is, I kid you not, the most wholesome shit I've ever read in my life. Can I get an amen?
Yeah, where my people at? Where my people at?
What made it so like first is it's got a lot of graphics and drawings. And besides, Nicola, you made it so fun and dynamic to read. Some chapters are really short, some were more romantic, the graphics actually provided to the storytelling, and I really enjoyed it overall. Last but not least, I needed to read a book with non-human characters on it, so I chose Dorothy Must Die by Danielle Page. It is a story about this girl, Amy from Kansas, who gets swept by a tornado into a very different Oz, where Dorothy has become evil and a sort of dictator in this place. So as the title says, Dorothy must die, and it is Amy's mission to kill her. This book has a lot of blood involved, but there's also a lot of magic and some drama and romance thrown into it. It was so interesting and it had me turning the page the entire time. It was just twist after twist and surprise after surprise, and God, I would love to see it on the screen. This was it for my quarantine TBR. I really hope you enjoyed it, and please make sure to drop any book recommendations down in the comments or in my socials, which I will leave in the description below. If this template interests you and you want to use it, I will leave the Drive link of the template picture down in the description below as well. Go ahead and use it for any occasion as long as you have a strong desire to read a lot. Please make sure to give it lots of love if you plan on using it, and thank you for watching. Bye!